Salvete. In the last couple of videos, we talked about the Roman or the Latin alphabet and the history of the language and how that affected pronunciation. In this video, we're going to look specifically at vowel sounds. Now, there are 6 vowels in Latin as there are in English, and they're the same 6 vowels, but we'll see that some of the sounds are a little bit different. The first vowel in Latin is the vowel A. The long A sound in Latin sounds like the A in our English word father. Ah. You can hear the same sound in the Latin word for fate, which is fatum. And these two words, and really the English word is just a derivative of the Latin word, but these two words very well illustrate the difference between the way the long A sounds in English and the way long A sounds in Latin. So, ah is the long A. Now, the short A is a less distinct sound. It's more like the first syllable in a word amaze. And so the Latin word for father, which has a short A, is pater. And in a sense, now, the difference between long and short in Latin is really just supposed to represent quantity, how long it says to say the word. So, strictly speaking, a long A is supposed to take twice as long to say as a short A. Sounds like you're starting to say the same syllable, but you just don't hold the sound as long. Anyway, the next vowel in Latin is the vowel E. And the long E actually sounds a lot like our long A, as in the word play.
The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king.
So the Latin word for an oar, the kind we use for rowing, is spelled R, long E, M-U-S, and it's pronounced remus. The short E sounds more like the E in our word bet, or maybe in pet. We can hear this sound in the Latin word petto, which means I seek, I go after, I head for, or in the case of a dog, I fetch. Another vowel that doesn't sound quite the same in Latin as it does in English is the vowel I. The long I, for instance, in classical Latin, sounds more like our long E, as for instance in our word seek. So this Latin word spelled D-I-C-O is pronounced dico, which means I say.
I say, old chap.
Now the short I in Latin is pronounced the same way as the English I in a word like sit. And in fact, there's a word in Latin spelled and pronounced the same way, only in Latin, sit means let it be.
Now let it be, let it be, oh let it be, yeah, let it be.
Next, we come to the vowel O, which actually sounds pretty much the way it does in English. The long O sound, for instance, is the same as in the English word toe. So the Latin word for Rome, Roma, is pronounced, well, Roma, spelled R-O, long O-M-A. Now the short O is more like the O in our English word not. So for instance, the Latin word for trick or deceit, deception, dolus. And it's pronounced, well, D-O-L-U-S. It's pronounced dolus. Now, U is another vowel that sounds very much the same in Latin as it does in English, with an important exception here. So the long U sound sounds much like the sound in our English word blue. So it sounds like our long U. We can hear this in the Latin word unus. By the way, notice it doesn't have kind of a y in front of it when it's the first letter in a word, as it sometimes does in English. Like, for instance, the English word unicycle, with kind of a y in front of the unicycle, in Latin it would be uniciclos, if there is such a word in Latin. But there isn't, but you know. Now the short U in Latin sounds like the short U in the English word put. For instance, in the Latin word sum, which means I am. The last of the single-letter vowels is Y. Now, we see Y rarely in Latin, and it's always a vowel, unlike in English, where it can also be a consonant. Whether long or short, it falls somewhere between the U sound we heard in unus and the short I in sit. So anyway, the word for pyramid is pronounced pyramis. Now, where two vowels combine to form one sound, we call that a diphthong. There are 6 different diphthongs in Latin, and this is a place where the vowel sounds will sound significantly different than they do in ecclesiastical Latin. Okay, so in classical Latin, the diphthong AE makes the sound I, like the eye we see through. If you're familiar with the ecclesiastical pronunciation, by the way, you know that it can make a different sound there. But in classical Latin, it sounds like I. We hear this in the Latin word for often, saepe. Now, the diphthong AU is pronounced ow, like the English interjection we make when we hurt ourselves.
Well, Mike, don't you try to... Ow! 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 Ow!
My apologies to the more mature among you. In any case, the Latin word for bold is pronounced audax. Now, the Latin diphthong EI sounds like the same vowel combination in the English word reign. And in fact, we see the same pronunciation in the English word reign, R-E-I-G-N, as in a king's reign. The Latin word that means next is pronounced dende. Now, the vowel combination EU is not strictly speaking a diphthong, since it makes more than one sound. We can somewhat hear each of the 2 letters distinctly. It's pronounced eu. If you just took the vowel sounds from the phrase hey you, we can hear this sound in Latin words, like the word for Europe, Europa. The combination OE is pronounced oi. We see this in the Latin word for battle, proelium. Again, spelled P-R-O-E-L-I-U-M, but pronounced proelium. Finally, UI, which is pronounced we. It's kind of like the sound we make when we're going down the roller coaster. So the word that means to this, spelled H-U-I-C, is pronounced huik. Okay, so that should sum up at least the main differences between the sounds of vowels in classical Latin and in modern English. In the next video, we'll take a look at consonant sounds. See you there. Valete.